Got a emergency call at about 12:15 on Friday the 16th of November. I went up the driveway and found the victim basically lying motionless. Had obvious facial injuries. There was blood all across his face. The man had been subjected to a significant assault. The occupants come out and he's observed the man on his driveway, and eventually once he sort of turned over the man, he can tell that it's his relative.
In November 2018, Eddie Peters was viciously beaten and left for dead on the driveway of a family member's home on Diaz Drive in Flaxmere.
I just remember it being a mad rush. At the time, it was like, oh, he's only got the night to live. Like, he's you know, it's really bad.
As soon as I saw him, the anger just built up.
Yeah, no one should ever feel like they gotta, do that kind of damage to somebody.
To them, like, he may have been, oh, who cares? We'll just do this to him. But he was like somebody to us, like to my whole family. Like, it broke my whole family.
After 4 years of stonewalling, no one has been held accountable for Eddie's death.
There were just a lot of doors getting shut in our face. Wherever their loyalties or allegiance lie, a man has died.
For the detectives who've worked on this case since the beginning, the drive to solve it is always there.
These sorts of cases never leave you as a detective. Ultimately, we're talking about somebody's life.
What happened to Eddie Peters is not okay. Eddie Peters was the victim of a crime, and that crime ultimately cost him his life.
4 years later, we've brought this cold case team together to review the violent death of Eddie Peters.
We need everyone to realise this isn't going away. The police are going to keep pushing this until we...
In the early hours of November the 16th, 2018, Eddie Peters did not look like he would survive the night.
So the paramedics were pretty much on the scene, similar time to police, and they quickly established that he had basically life-threatening injuries. The primary thing for us is once he's safely in the hospital and getting the medical attention is basically trying to unpick his movements and backtrack in terms of a timeline. So this is where Eddie made it to. He may have attempted to knock on the door, we don't know, probably not. And he's literally ended up sort of just on the grass verge, just off the concrete driveway there.
Detective Sergeant Craig Vining was second in charge of the investigation.
It wasn't apparent straight away, but the death of another man turned out to have quite a significant bearing on what we now know happened to Eddie that night. On the afternoon of 15 November, we know that a senior member of the Mongrel Mob passed away. He died of natural causes. As is the case, any sudden death, police attended, and the staff quickly realised that it was perhaps going to unfold at this particular address because of who had died. And as it turned out, as it transpired, it effectively became an impromptu tangi. And that brings in a lot of other patched mobsters. So we're probably talking different times that afternoon, evening, 30, 40, 50 people. So Eddie and the man who died have a long connection. They've been good friends since school, so he knew him well. Eddie, he's not part of any gang. His connection is simply that he had a good friend, at least one good friend, in the mob. Eddie was in Hastings. He was just biking around and happened to go past his cousin's address. The cousin had already found out that Eddie's friend had passed away. Eddie left his bike there and made his way to the tangi and Diaz. He spent a bit of time drinking. There's differing views on how he was handling his alcohol. One person described him as being fairly wasted. Another person described him as not really being a nuisance and just being there effectively and drinking. I think Eddie would have struggled a bit at the tangi. I think generally when he went to this address, he would have had his friend there, and literally if others came in, would have been able to introduce Eddie to these people and sort of include him in it, but obviously that wasn't possible. So my impression is he may have just felt on a little bit on the outer with all these mobsters and gang members around. We know Eddie was at the tangi up until about 9:30, and then he's walked to a friend's house not too far away. I think the friend that he was there to see wasn't, and this is another friend, a mutual friend of the man who had died, and I think Eddie was quite keen to obviously perhaps go back to the tangi with that man, and again just have someone there that he knew well and was familiar with.
Eddie heads back to the tangi on his own around 10 o'clock. Despite the large gang presence at the house that night, there were no problems reported. Not until just after midnight.
So we've got two occupants on Diaz Drive who are up shortly before midnight on the night of the 15th. And the first thing that they register is basically people running across the front of their property. The next thing they sort of hear is some whispering from the vicinity of the driveway next door. And then they hear a male groaning, and they also hear a dog growling. At that point, they make the decision to call police.
Paramedics and police arrive to find Eddie lying unconscious in a pool of blood in the driveway of a family member, just 200 metres from where the tangi was happening, further down Diaz Drive.
The impression we get from where Eddie ended up is basically he was looking for refuge, literally running for his life.
He had something funny to say without even trying, even when he was trying to be serious.
We got a call like really early in the morning, and they just said that it's gotten worse, and that he's getting flown to Wellington. They said that they were going to do brain surgery.
I was going, come on, bro, you can do this, you know.
And like we were sitting there waiting for him to wake up.
And it wasn't until a wee bit later it felt like, yeah, he was slipping away.
I just knew, I knew he wasn't going to wake up. Yeah, I could just feel that he wasn't going to wake up.
8 days after he was assaulted, Eddie dies of complications from blunt force trauma to his head.
or it becomes a homicide investigation. It was tricky, if I'm honest. We've got a group of individuals at this tangi and we can connect, Eddie to the tangi. We know he was there. And then you've got people who just won't talk. And then you look at the street and the area generally. We did make some good connections with people who we think knew quite a bit about what had happened and Eddie's movements on that night. And we went back to some of these people the next week and the doors are shut.
I wanted to really give the police a chance to put their case together and hear them first. And then when that came, it was like, sharks, they've got nothing.
I mean, the mob in Hawke's Bay is relatively strong anyway, but look, I don't want to single out Flaxmere as being an overly complicated suburb when this sort of thing happens. This could be a little suburb in Auckland, and I think you'd still have the same challenges. Ideally, we'd want to go back to some of these people 4 years on and say, look, did you still not see anything or hear anything, or have perceptions changed, have loyalties changed? We can't impress on people enough. If we don't get the community's assistance with these sort of investigations, it tends to stall, and that's exactly what happened. I know that there will be plenty of people who attended that tangi that night, plenty of mobsters who know exactly who was involved and who was responsible for assaulting Eddie and the actions that led to his death, without a doubt.
And not having any news they're hard phone calls to make.
Detective Sergeant Craig Vining has been working on this case since November 2018.
Yeah, I'm really positive about
information and give the opportunity for the public to come forward and speak to us, provide a little bit of reassurance around it.
for the people in Diaz and even wider Flaxmere, it's a death in their community that's gone unresolved. That community, we owe it to them as much as the family to progress the case and hopefully find, identify these offenders and make them accountable.
It's always been there for us. It is still there. This is a reminder that it's still something that we do want to reach a conclusion for.
The team returned to the scene where Eddie was found shortly after midnight on the 16th of November.
Eddie was located lying in a fetal position up against the fence. There was an obvious pool of blood.
The injuries that Eddie suffered, the facial fractures that he suffered, would have been a lot of force involved for those injuries.
So in the days after Eddie was assaulted, the family member who lived at this address washed the scene down, which makes complete sense. Post that, though, when we had the luminol photographs done at night, they glow blue in the areas that there's blood.
There's no doubt that this assault was very severe.
People talked of Eddie being a happy-go-lucky, harmless person, and the fact that he was the victim of such violence that night seems in a really sad contrast to him as a person.
So we know that Eddie's good friend passed away at an address on Diaz Drive at approximately 3 p.m. on the 15th of November 2018. he was a member of the Mongrel Mob.
At some point in the afternoon of the 15th, Eddie became aware that his good friend had passed away. He left his bike at an address in Hastings and caught a ride from there out to Diaz Drive.
It would have been a big event on Diaz Drive that night.
Probably at different times, we're talking about 40, 50 people. We know there was different chapters of the Mongrel Mob there, it wasn't just the one.
I think a key thing to remember is that Eddie wasn't a member of any of those chapters or the Mongrel Mob. He attended that tangi because he knew that man and had known him for many, many years.
We know that Eddie was present from that sort of early to mid-afternoon time. He was drinking.
We have spoken to some people who attended the tangi that night. There's one witness who described Eddie as being quite drunk, and then they referred to this altercation. Couldn't say who the altercation involved, but other than Eddie, they talked about him sort of being in a wobbly state and bumping into people. I'm not sure what we make of it.
We've spoken to other people who were also at the tangi who spoke of Eddie drinking and perhaps being intoxicated, but definitely not to that same level.
Yep.
Some people, I think, are making Eddie out to be more of a problem at that tangi than perhaps he was.
Again, we are left in a position where we don't actually know the truth of exactly what happened.
And it could have been something extremely innocuous, a raised voice or a perception of him being cheeky to effectively create this altercation.
Could also have been that genuine gang members that were at that tangi didn't think that Eddie needed to be there.
I feel that Eddie was isolated somewhat at the address. He was not a family member. He wasn't a gang member. And whilst there were people who acknowledged that Eddie was there, we haven't yet spoken to anyone who spent a lot of time with Eddie.
We do believe something has happened between Eddie and 1, 2, 3 people at the tangi, which has led on to then him obviously leaving the tangi at about 9:30 that night. He walked to a friend's house not too far away from where the tangi was occurring and had a conversation with the occupant there. He knew by that point that he was in a bit of trouble. He talked about that he was going to get a hiding.
She also said that when he talked of possibly getting a hiding and ending up in hospital, that it was fairly light-hearted, the way that he said it, and she wasn't actually sure whether he was being serious or not.
So why do we think he went back to that tangi?
Yeah, I think he was still trying to pay his respects.
And that, to me, reflects a little bit about the type of person that Eddie is. He was really loyal to his close friends and his close mates, regardless of the circumstances that surrounded it.
No one at the tangi reports any issues or altercations involving Eddie after he returns to Diaz Drive around 10 p.m. But by midnight, neighbours further down Diaz Drive are worried about the sound of a man groaning and call police.
So if we look at the map, quite a way down Diaz, sort of 250 metres, we know that the occupants there were still up around midnight.
The neighbour heard whispering for several minutes between more than one person. In fact, her initial thoughts were that perhaps somebody was breaking into the house next door, and that's why she rang the police.
What's your guys' take on the whispering?
So they've assaulted Eddie. Now what are they going to do about it? Are they having regret? He's obviously lying on the ground, probably by then in the fetal position.
Yep. So we know that in the early hours of the 16th of November, Eddie was admitted to hospital in a very serious condition. On the 19th of November, Eddie had recovered to the point where we had an opportunity to talk to Eddie.
His statement to police is very brief. He said, "It might have been my fault. I could have been lippy. It probably was me." He acknowledges being very drunk, and he quite tellingly at the bottom says nobody will say anything.
In the days that Eddie was conscious, he told Sky a similar story.
I was like to him, like, what happened? And I just remember him saying, like, kind of brushing it off, like, he's like, oh, it was just these young ones, you know. And I wanted to push more, but he was just brushing it off like it was nothing.
It was probably young ones, like young prospects trying to be cool. It could have been Mongrel Mob.
We believe that he knew the people that had assaulted him that night. We also believe that they were attending that tangi.
Eddie knows at least one of the people who assaulted him that night.
I also think it's likely in that week that he probably did tell others about who was involved.
Are there friends of Eddie who are still holding on to the names of those responsible for his death?
So we know at that stage Eddie was obviously conscious, and no one knew the severity of Eddie's injuries at that time. He probably thought in his own mind that he'd taken his beating. He'd suffered the consequences of what had happened.
It's a bit sad, isn't it, that he felt he had to almost own it, whereas he's the victim.
Yeah, that's really, really common. We speak almost on a daily basis of gang members who have been shot, but conscious, and they're like, nah, we won't talk to you about it. Again, because they're adhering to this code of silence.
Detective Sergeant Raymond Sunkel has focused his policing career on understanding how gangs in New Zealand operate.
One of the characteristics of gangs is the immediacy of violence at hand, and they use it to enforce their rules. And with that comes, again, that real sense of intimidation that they try and put across everybody, because they want to be seen as strong.
So we came up against some real difficulties in this investigation. But as we know, we've had people come forward and speak to us, and some of that information is really crucial around the movements of Eddie and the persons of interest in this investigation before he was assaulted. We've got some really good factual information about what went down at that time, and that's really crucial for us.
On the 16th of November 2018, 45-year-old father Eddie Peters was found in a pool of blood with severe head injuries. He'd been at a Mongrel Mob tangi for an old school friend earlier that night in Diaz Drive, Flaxmere. His body was found up the driveway at a relative's house just over 200 metres away. There were up to 50 people at the tangi that night, as well as witnesses from around the neighbourhood. Very few of those have come forward. But in the early days of the homicide inquiry, there was some valuable information given to police.
So the big drive for us on that first week of the investigation was the area canvass.
Yep. And there was a reluctance to speak to the police about the circumstances of this case, but some people did come forward to us.
So the way it's been described to us as a person who we believe was Eddie, fits his description in terms of what he was wearing that night in the street, literally in front of the tangi. There was 2 or 3 people around Eddie at this time, and there appeared to be some form of verbal altercation. We've got one of these 3 advancing on Eddie, and he's backing up. I mean, the inference is that he's scared.
Well, there certainly was 2 or 3 of them and one of him.
Eddie's a middle-aged man. We know, not a violent guy.
At some point we know that literally Eddie has turned around and run up Diaz away from these guys, and they've chased him down the road.
I believe he was fearful. He ran up the street to get away from that altercation, and they followed him.
He was running. He didn't want to be there, and he ran. So he's running from the tangi towards the address that he was later found. He's run up the driveway to a family member's house. I think he was going for help. I think he was trying to find somewhere safe to get away from these people.
And what sort of time are we thinking that this is likely to occur?
So we're looking at around 11:30, 11:45.
Yep.
The other interesting aspect, or relevant aspect for us, is that one of these 3 had a dog with them.
Having a dog there corroborates what the neighbour heard. He said, I could hear a dog. It was a bigger dog. It was breathing heavy and growling, maybe like a bulldog.
What else do we know about that?
So we know all 3 were wearing Mongrel Mob patches, One was in a black one, and 2 of them were in red patches. Reasonably young, so we're talking maybe early 20s, mid-20s at most for, say, 2 of them. But the third one of them one who was wearing the red patch, certainly younger, late teens, and described almost as that their patch was oversized for them.
And do we believe that these 3 people had come from that tangi?
Absolutely.
Young guys that we've seen joining gangs, they're often A-type personalities, and a show of strength is so important within a gang. It's important to be seen as being capable when it comes to fighting. Put it in the context of a tangi where there are emotions, and then introduce alcohol, introduce the potential of other drugs, and somebody being a bit cheeky at the wrong time would definitely be one of those opportunities for somebody to have a fight. For someone non-gang, they are probably more susceptible to being saying the wrong thing and for something to be taken the wrong way. It could be as simple as, certainly within the Mongrel Mob, someone barking when they shouldn't be barking.
No one describes Eddie as being violent, but he is frequently described as cheeky. Has something Eddie said been taken the wrong way? For the first time, the investigation team is revealing a key piece of evidence which could shed more light on that altercation.
So during the area canvass phase, we obtained a search warrant and obtained CCTV from the street. And that was massive for the investigation. Potentially we've got our persons of interest in some footage. Potentially we're capturing some events. The quality of the footage is actually really good. You can pick out particular people that we know within that group standing out the front of the tangi.
Certainly corroborates what other people have told us in terms of there being, 30, 40, up to 50 people there during the day.
Also corroborates the fact that a lot of those people were wearing gang patches. We know that there was multiple chapters present that day across the Mongrel Mob, and we know that Eddie was there based on the footage. We can clearly see him.
Here we've got a picture of Eddie standing outside. I think probably his hairs was distinctive for us in terms of identifying Eddie. Might have been in a ponytail, but you can tell it's particularly long. He's being hugged by a likely gang associate that's arrived at the tangi.
So this person who's greeting Eddie here and hugging him obviously knows him quite well. That person also isn't wearing a patch, and he's one of a number of people that we have not been able to identify who may have some information that's useful to this investigation.
Are you the man hugging Eddie in this footage? More importantly, did the CCTV capture the altercation between Eddie and the 3 younger gang members?
From what we can see in the footage, in sort of that 11:30 to 12 bracket, is movement figures consistent with what we know in terms of what's been described in the street.
But by 11:30, the footage is too dark to make out details.
I recall discussing with the team at the time that it obviously didn't quite take us to where we wanted to be in terms of potentially identifying people directly from the footage, but that's an ongoing piece of work.
The nighttime footage is not as clear as the daytime footage, but it's still enough to see movements, see figures. Clearly we can't identify anybody in this footage as it currently stands, but with technology, things like figures and movement become a lot more obvious and a lot more visible within that footage.
Can technology reveal more detail in the footage that could identify the 3 men who chased Eddie down Diaz Drive? Police have revealed there is CCTV footage from Diaz Drive the night Eddie Peters was assaulted in November 2018. A 45-year-old father, Eddie died 8 days after a brutal beating about the head. On the night of the assault, Eddie was seen being chased by 3 young gang members. The CCTV footage shows some movement around the time of the altercation, but it's too dark to be certain. The cold case team is hoping the images could be enhanced with the help of technology.
Well, that's the original, so we can add a layer that will change the brightness. It's a bit like going into a dark room. If you want to see more detail, you turn the lights on.
Forensic imaging expert Dr. Ian Calhaim isn't looking at the frame as a whole.
I'm working here at the limit of the pixel resolution. I saw a number of movements of people, mostly from left to right. And you can see in this case, we've got somebody moving across the screen. Individually, you couldn't identify that as even being a person. But when you see it in the whole frame, the eye automatically registers what it's seen just before. I saw somebody walking steady pace, but not hurried, come from the left and walk across the road and then along the footpath on the far side. Then I saw someone running down the road from left to right. Here we've got the head, the body and the two legs. Obviously, because he's running, those legs are further apart. Now, because they were running, the camera blurs all the image, and therefore there was very little detail I could see there. A little while after that, there was a person with a dog, and they were walking at a very leisurely pace along the centre of the road. About 6 minutes later, a man with that particular type of dog came into view again. Almost as soon as he appeared in the frame, there was another person walking very fast along the footpath, followed by a third person walking at a very purposeful pace, again from right to left.
I think he's done a better job than what I anticipated he was going to do, to be honest.
Yeah. It's immense for me that what we thought we were seeing, we were actually seeing. And ultimately, it is the last movements of Eddie before he gets assaulted.
The enhanced footage gives the team new clarity, but also raises some questions. We see 3 people walking away, but we also see 3 people return. Dr. Calhaim has detected one more crucial piece of evidence from the footage.
The person that walked across the road and then along the footpath on the far side seemed to be dressed entirely in black. And I didn't see a person dressed entirely in black coming back. So he was the one person that seemed to go from left to right, but not right to left. The man on the dog matched the person coming back. The person running matched the pixel colouring of the person that walked rapidly along the footpath just ahead of the man with the dog. The last person we saw in the frame, I could not match to anyone that had gone from left to right.
So what the CCTV analysis has given us is the first person doesn't return, which I think for all of us confirms that that person was Eddie.
It definitely tells us that we are on the right track. The people that we have spoken to who have given us information, this corroborates it.
Oh, absolutely, yep.
With more detail confirmed, the team returned to the afternoon footage to see if there are other clues that could identify the 3 persons of interest.
Well, certainly in the daytime footage, there is at least one dog present.
Very interesting to know, is this the same dog?
The daytime footage also gives investigators a chance to look for younger, patched gang members who match the witness accounts.
If we go back to the descriptions, we've got 1 in a black patch, 2 in red patches, and we also know that on the back of the patches was Hastings. So obviously Hastings chapter involvement.
If you watch that footage, black is the predominant colour across those vests. There are not as many red vests present.
There's a mixture of patches, but, you know, for example, here we can see a relatively young guy wearing a red patch, red cap, white T-shirt, and he appears to be one of the few people, certainly younger people, even present, let alone wearing a red patch.
Were you at the Diaz Drive tangi on the 15th of November 2018? Do you recognise anyone in the footage? Your help could go a long way in assisting the investigation team to finally get answers for Eddie and his family.
So we've got some more work to do with the CCTV. We can accurately compare images from daytime versus nighttime, being able to confirm particular articles of clothing between pictures. If we go back to why Eddie was there in the first place, his good mate who passed away was a senior member of the Hastings Mongrel Mob. Eddie's an innocent party in all this, you know. He was there to celebrate the life of his good mate. And at least 2 members of the Hastings Mongrel Mob have likely been responsible for assaulting him.
And you think about their ages too, you know, was there a bit of bravado when they've come back? Is there a feeling of job done, a bit more of a swagger to the step as they've come back?
Violence is so ingrained in gang culture that this won't have been their first fight, nor will it be their last. So 3 young guys having a fight, winning, they'll see that as amazing. Walk inside, hey look, we just gave this guy a hiding who's been cheeky, happy days, let's get back to drinking. However, once he does pass away and they become aware of it, there will be some panic, without a doubt. And they will have tried and gone and seen people and said, you can't say anything.
Surely senior members of the Mongrel Mob Hastings need to look at this and think their members are responsible, and yet what are they doing?
Oh, there'd absolutely be senior members that wouldn't be comfortable with somebody dying as a result of an assault at a tangi for a Mongrel Mob member. We'd be asking them to say, I'm still a brother, a son, a father, and I would like someone else in my position to do the right thing were it one of my family members that was killed.
I think it very much hardens our resolve. We've got to acknowledge that that won't be easy in terms of what potential approaches to that particular chapter might look like, but these are the things that we're going to have to explore now over the coming weeks and months.
Eddie Peters was severely assaulted at a Mongrel Mob tangi in Flaxmere in November 2018. He died 8 days later from blunt force trauma to the head. The tangi had been for an old school friend of Eddie's, who was a senior member of the Hastings chapter. Now, police have strong evidence that 3 younger members of that Hastings chapter are responsible for Eddie's death.
Eddie's an innocent party in all this, you know. He was there to celebrate the life of his good mate.
They grew up together, you know. He was a big brother to my brother, you know, he looked after him as well. Yeah, who's in this one here? That's Eddie in there, eh?
This is Eddie, and that's me.
Yeah.
This was at Fantasyland. Remember Fantasyland?
Yep.
The greatest thing that I noticed about Eddie was he acknowledged people. And a lot of people were like this. They don't know him because of the way he was dressed, eh? Yeah. He'd yell out to someone, hello, uncle, hello, auntie, and all of that. It didn't matter where he was, in the street.
Yeah. Dad didn't discriminate who he was friends with. If he liked someone, he liked someone.
I was like this photo because he's in his element, you know, relaxed, happy.
But that was him, like in his leathers, with his smoke in his hand.
And that's how I remember him.
I was quite amazed actually, at his tangi, like how many people showed up and how many people came up to me, and like all walks of life, you know, and he knew a lot of people. Oh, this one here. That's a good one.
That was at my 21st birthday. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's all of us. Me and my siblings. Danny Tanner said, Shucks, we've got to get a photo of you guys before you fellas don't see each other again for another couple of years.
Eddie had thought about his own death, thought about what he would be able to give Sky and Tawhiri as a parent.
Couldn't offer much, but I said to him that just having you there is the best thing, bro, because you've got the one thing that most people struggle with, and that's a big heart. That's the best thing you can give them, or anyone.
Well, I'm still grieving Dad, like more sadness than anything, but you know, there is a bit of anger, but like if I was to be angry all the time, like that's not good for me. Like I just try and focus on who Dad was.
Yeah, I thought about it a lot. Try to put myself in their shoes, you know. Yeah, I don't understand it. You know, you targeted the most vulnerable at the party or whatever. Yeah, just a cowardice move, really. There's people that are out there, got away with it, you know, and you don't want them to do it again.
For me, what's going to take this case forward is people coming to talk to us. And we accept that there's still going to be some apprehension in that.
During the course of this investigation, we have gathered information about what happened that night. We have spoken to people. We have CCTV footage from the street that has been enhanced, and that's really useful to our investigation, to a point.
It's really important that people give us the opportunity to tell us what they know so we can sort of work out where their information fits into the puzzle of Eddie's death.
There's also the 3 persons of interest. So they know exactly who they are, they know exactly what happened that night, and they also have this opportunity now to come and talk to us about what happened that night.
They may well have thought, everyone's moved on, the police have moved on, I've moved on from this, but this isn't going away. This is coming back, and they're sitting there potentially watching this and thinking, I know I'm responsible, what is my decision-making from here?
I think the leaders, they need to step back and go, that isn't right. This wasn't gang business. This wasn't a gang deal. This wasn't gang on gang. This is a member of the public, effectively, that's lost their life as a result of coming to pay respect to one of our members. We should do the right thing. Senior members should give permission to anybody there to speak to police if they know what's happened.
We loved him, man. You know, he was our dad.
To give me peace would firstly someone coming forward and giving information, like as little as it could be, and like secondly is someone admitting to what they did, and thirdly, like I want to be able to talk to that person and, like, you know, ask them why, like that. I feel like that's where I'll find my peace, is knowing why.
If I had the opportunity to, you know, get around the table and see those people or that person or whoever was involved, you know, like, let's do it, you know, like, just get around the table, have a cordial, let's talk about it, you know, because we could be onto something to prevent it from ever happening to somebody else. And I think that's what my brother would have really wanted. He was that kind of a person, redemption, you know, wanted to redeem himself in the most way possible, you know, that's the sort of person he was.
I do hope that at some point I can make that call to Eddie's family and let them know that the people who were responsible for Eddie's death will be held to account. And we can't do it on our own. We need the community that Eddie lived in, the community that Eddie died in, to resolve this situation. Resolve it for Eddie, resolve it for his family, and resolve it simply for the fact that we are people who live in this town. And what happened that night is not okay.